as he had that weekly newspaper editor. My father had a doctor for whom he made suits. And this doctor came to the town in New Jersey where I was born during the 1930s Depression, but he came from Alabama, very deep south, the state of Alabama, which I never heard of, until the doctor said to my father, maybe your son would like to go to Alabama. Of course, my father never heard of Alabama either. It was a foreign country, as far as we knew. But anyway, the doctor had influence, and he made a phone call to someone he knew in the faculty. And thus I went to the University of Alabama, got on a train 800 miles. It took overnight from New Jersey by train all the way down to the deep south. And I felt I was an immigrant. I was now like my father had been. He went by ship to the United States, and I'm going by train to a foreign country called Alabama. And it was again a wonderful experience because, as I'd always been in my life, an outsider. I went to Alabama as an outsider, marginally American. In Alabama, of course, they weren't talking about the fascists anymore. The war was over. It was 1949 when I went, and I stayed from 1949, 1950, 1951, 1950. I was there. And what was the story there? Racism. Because Alabama and neighboring states like Georgia and Mississippi were all white. And I wondered, am I white enough to be in this place? Because I thought I was a minority. And I also became aware of the racial distinctions. Because in those days, this is a decade before Martin Luther King's movement, those days you'd go to the fountain and see colored, black, and white. Bathrooms, colored, white. Restaurants, all white. There was movie theaters, whites were here, blacks were here. Buses, white people sat in the front, black people sat in the back. So I was a visitor to Alabama and observing. Before the Civil Rights Movement, I saw the story by being there in this racist state of Alabama, that had somewhat lower academic status, which is how I got in. That and the fact that I knew the doctor who had already been there and knew connections. Or else I wouldn't have gone to college at all. But going to Alabama made me a better writer, a better journalist. Why? Because I saw another side of the story. I saw it. I didn't read about it or get it through the internet, because there was no internet. I was there. That's valuable information for the journalist. And it's a lesson I always thought was imperative. You have to be there. You have to be there. You have to see with your own eyes. As I saw in the store with my own eyes, a small community with its prejudices, with its fears, with its different cultures, its different attitude about everything. And in Alabama, a kind of singular racist mentality in government and even in academia. Alabama was a university. It had university professors, not only from Alabama, there were some professors from Boston, there were professors from California, there were professors from New York. And they were part of a racist society because they had jobs, professors of geology, professors of history, professors of French Revolution, the professors of mathematics. But they were not protesting the fact that black people couldn't be in a class. There was no protest then. The 1950s was no protest. It was a time when the world was worried about communism. It was a time when Joe McCarthy, a member of the Senate, was worried about communists in government. No one was worried about racists in Alabama until the 1960s. 1960s, after I graduated from Alabama, which was in 1953, I wanted to be a journalist in a big city. And I came to New York, without any connections, except one. One connection I had, and it's important how connections affect your life. From the weekly newspaper guy that got me to work in the weekend, and then the Alabama doctor got me to go to Alabama. And on Alabama, while I was a student, there was a young man who was in a class I knew, a Southerner, of course, and he was from Mississippi. And when I worked on the college newspaper, and this friend of mine from Mississippi said, you know, if you want to get a job and you go to New York, I have a cousin who works for the New York Times. Really? I said, yes. He's the managing editor. I said, you're kidding. The managing editor of the New York Times is a cousin of yours? Yes. Well, how do I meet him? Just go up there and give him my name, Jimmy Pinkston. And my cousin on the maternal side is named Turner Catledge. Turner Catledge is the managing editor of the New York Times. So God, when I graduated Alabama in 1953, the first thing I did after I said hello to my parents, they were still in a dress shop, Little Taylor. I got on a bus 2 days later and I went to New York. I got off the bus and a block away is the New York Times building. And I was dressed as I always am, I'm the son of a tailor. The way I'm dressed tonight is the way I dressed when I was 15, 16, 17. And now I am 20 years old, 21 years old. And I get out, I see the New York Times building. I go up the elevator, the news room says the third floor, news. I go to the third floor and I walk in, and it's big, big reception room. And on the walls behind the portraits of the publisher's family. The publisher at this time. Another picture was the publisher 20 years ago. Another portrait was the publisher 40 years ago. This is all one family, the Sulzberger family. One family owned that paper. And the portraits of the owning family, like a royal dynasty, like the Windsor or the Habsburgs. It was all there. And the receptionist, an elderly man with a bow tie and white hair. I walked to him, I stood in front of his desk, looked up, he said, "May I help you, young man?" I said, "Yes, thank you. I want to say hello briefly to Mr. Turner Catledge." "Do you have an appointment?" I said, "No." "Well, what brings you here?" I said, "Well, I know his cousin. His cousin's a friend of mine. I just graduated from the University of Alabama." His cousin told me